Right, so hi everyone, I'm Jeff. I'm a first year icon student in Jeb Byers' lab in the Odom School of Ecology, and this is a proposal talk about some of the things that I'm interested in pursuing for my dissertation research. So broadly, I'm interested in the conservation of coastal salt marshes in the Southeast, and these are very near and dear to my heart. I grew up in Savannah. I have a lot of fond memories playing in these areas, and I want to maintain their ecological integrity for future generations and for the people who rely on them to make their livelihood. And the reason why this is so critical at this time is many areas of the coastal Southeast are already heavily developed, either to support the local population or major tourism industries that are centered there. So this is an example. This is Hilton Head Island, which used to be sparsely inhabited, very low development, and now it's practically every inch of land that could be made into a resort is made into a resort. And so as coastal populations continue to grow and the tourism industry remains a major economic machine in this area, the need for coastal marsh preservation will always be there and continue to increase in its importance. And not only am I concerned with maintaining the ecological integrity of marshes in the face of development, but I'm concerned with where the land for future developments will come from. And the reason for this is that many communities, particularly African American communities in the Southeast, are characterized by a vulnerable type of property ownership known as heirs property. So to begin to understand heirs property, let's contrast it to the way we normally think about property transference. So we start with the landowner, Blue, here, who has some title to their parcel of land. And when Blue dies, so long as they leave a will, all the recipients of that transfer of land will have their own title and complete control of their slice of the pie. However, if Blue were to die without leaving a will, then heirs property is formed. And that is got some very interesting idiosyncrasies that I'll kind of simplify for the sake of time. But essentially what would happen is the share in the title of the land would be equally split amongst all of Blue's descendants. But no one descendant has complete control or a clear title to any given part of that land, hence the smear of brown. So what this functionally means is that if Red were to build a farm on their property, yellow and green have equal legal access to it. And that means they could have a split in the profits, they could have a say in the management of it, even though they aren't involved in the building of it at all. And this problem compounds itself because after just a few generations, you can imagine you have dozens of individuals who have a share in this title. And regardless of the size of their share, they have equal legal rights to that entire property. And so this is inherently unstable and vulnerable and causes economic issues for the people who live on this property. What I'm most concerned with is the stability, because if any one of those heirs there decided they could file a civil suit known as a partition of kind, in which the land would be divided amongst all the heirs, or a partition of sale, in which the land would be sold off and the profits would be split amongst the heirs in accordance to their share. And the issue and why this makes this vulnerable is if a developer were to entice one of those heirs to sell them their share, they could then use this partition of sale to buy out the land from underneath all the other heirs. And they have limited legal means to counteract that. And so there are a few notable cases on areas such as Hilton Head Island where developers have aggressively targeted and acquired heirs' land and have followed that up by building extensive high-end resort communities. And so, because of this, there are a few really notable cases of that. I'm interested in assessing the generality of that process in the past. And because that process was so popular in the past, or I believe it was so popular, it continues to this day, and there are specific communities along the Southeast coast that continue to be targeted in this way. And so I'm also interested in assessing the distribution of heirs' land today with respect to their access to coastal salt marshes and assessing their vulnerability to acquirement by developers. And what this could mean is that the inherent instability of this type of property ownership not only negatively impacts all of the heirs who are involved, but it could have damaging ecological consequences if these properties are routinely targeted by developers and then subsequently developed. And one type of ecological impact of development I'm most interested in studying are private docks. So private docks are incredibly common in the coastal Southeast, and it's hard to get a sense of how common they are until you've been there, but and we know relatively little about them despite their commonness. But this is a 1.3 kilometer stretch of marsh on Wilmington Island in Savannah, and there are 31 docks in these pictures, in this picture. And some of these structures, namely these here, are massive. They're over 300 to 350 meters long. And on the remaining 8 square miles of this island, there are 300 more docks as of 2000. And I can tell you, growing up here, there are a lot more now than 300. So we don't know a whole lot about what they do, but thanks to some work by Clark Alexander at the Skidaway Institute in Savannah, we do know one of the most visually striking examples of the damage they can cause to marshes is through, well, that's really grainy, but it's through the changing of the deposition of wrack. So wrack is all this stuff in brown here, and it's formed from the dead stems of the major dominant, or the dominant vegetation, Spartina. And normally, when that Spartina dies off every winter, it forms these huge mats that either normally wash to sea or would form in a relatively narrow band along the shore. However, docks trap the wrack and cause it to accumulate perpendicular to the shore, so it increases its footprint deeper into the marsh. And this could have cascading ecological impacts because Spartina smothers and kills the living grass, which forms almost all of the habitat in marshes and stabilizes the sediment. And so I'm interested in further understanding the impacts of docks, which there are so many there could be, and I'd love to talk to people about them later. But for the sake of time, just to recap, I'm interested in taking my research in the direction of assessing the vulnerabilities of heirs land and seeing if those can be linked to or possibly driving ecological damage to marshes due to development and the subsequent building of private docks. So thank you, and with that, I will take questions. Yes?
I have some experience with wetlands management in Georgia, and we at least have a law protecting coastal marshland, but you started off with Hilton Head. Does South Carolina have a similar law?
Yeah, so there's some really interesting differences between the way the South Carolina and Georgia coasts have been developed. And so because a lot of the barrier islands of Georgia were the playgrounds of the rich and famous, when they died, they passed those on to the state, and a lot of them are protected. South Carolina does have laws protecting marshes, but docks really aren't considered damaging to marshes. We don't really know very much about them, though. Now, this in Georgia, this picture in particular caused the DNR to ban new docks being built that were over 1,000 feet in length. So you can build a private dock now, but it can't be over 1,000 feet. And this dock, I think, is some like 1,300 feet long. So there are regulations, but they don't really cover docks. People are still allowed to build docks.
Let's talk over the break.
Yeah.
Do you have a good sense yet whether there are substantial heirs property, particularly in Georgia, adjacent to salt marsh?
So not as well in Georgia, but in South Carolina there definitely are. Especially there are big fights now on Ladies Island, which is a back barrier island in South Carolina, and particularly in the Gullah Geechee communities of those areas, a lot of that land remains heirs property.
Great. So. Okay, let's thank Jeff.